I'm a dude now in my 20s and who has a decent paying job that helps keep my bills down. But when I was younger, 16 to be exact, I used to babysit my neighbor's 3 kids every night they went to work in order to buy a car after getting my driver's license. Mikey, Sarah, and Jim are their names. Mikey was 10, Sarah was 8, and Jim only 3 at the time, and they were good kids. They were well-mannered and never acted up, which did in fact make my time babysitting them much easier, and I enjoyed watching them. Well, that's until one night that I went over there to my neighbor's to babysit. It was around 9 o'clock at night, right after I put Jim to bed, when me, Mikey, and Sarah were watching TV in the living room. I believe the movie was The Monster Squad. You know, the one where the kids had to fight Dracula and other popular monsters like the werewolf and the creature from the lagoon? Well, we were all 3 sitting on the couch very much invested in the movie when we would hear a thud coming from upstairs. Fearing that Jim might have fell from his crib, I rushed up to his room to thankfully still see him inside of it, asleep. But for some reason his window was cracked open, and I swore it wasn't when I first laid him in his crib. I just shut it back, then locked it, before turning off his light to his bedroom, then going back downstairs to finish watching the movie with Mikey and Sarah. I might have sat down for like 20 seconds before yet again we would hear noises coming from upstairs, but that's when I realized something. The thuds wasn't coming from the second story of the house, they were coming from the attic. And beyond my better judgment, I decided to go up into the attic after telling Mikey and Sarah to remain on the couch. I grabbed a flashlight from the cabinet next to the pantry, then I made my way up into the darkness of the attic. I climbed the steps leading to the door, then slowly opened it, trying to be quiet. But the cracking sound didn't let it stay silent as I walked into the dust-filled room. I looked around for a few seconds, but didn't hear or see anything at first, until I went to walk back downstairs. Right as I made it to the door, I would take one last glance back, just to see the large silhouette of a man stand up from behind some boxes, and would slowly begin to approach me. I slammed the door behind me, locking it as I ran back downstairs, all while hearing the person pounding on the door from the other side, trying to get out. I ran to Jim's room, picked him up from his crib, before rushing back downstairs to get Mikey and Sarah, before fleeing the house and going to mine, where I would inform my mom and dad about the intruder. Terrified to hear that some stranger had broke into our neighbor's home, my parents would phone the police, who showed up in record time, and after about 20 minutes of searching the house, the only thing they would find was the attic door knocked down and trickles of blood leading from the attic downstairs to Jim's bedroom window, where I'm guessing the intruder gained entry. And just thinking about that freaks me out. The person, obviously having bad intentions, climbed in and out of an infant's window and could have easily took him or harmed him. But as much as I would like to say it did, the story doesn't end there. About 3 nights later, well after my neighbors found out about the man that broke into their home, I would be at my house laying in bed around midnight, where I was just about to fall asleep, before I heard my dog barking from out in the living room, right before I heard the loud screaming of an unfamiliar voice, and my dad shouting as well. After I got out of bed and ran to see what the commotion was, I would witness my dog Ruby holding a strange but large man by his arm as blood steady gushed all over our living room floor, and she wasn't letting go. My mom, who also came out to see what was transpiring, would call the cops while my dad shouted threats at the guy and refused to get Ruby off of him until the police showed up. And once they did, they would take the guy into custody. What took place that night was a home break-in by the same man that broke into my neighbor's 3 nights before, and what he told the police was nightmare fuel and had me throw up from being so scared. The man said that he broke into my neighbor's house because he was planning on hiding, then waiting for the opportunity to rape and then kill my female neighbor after he murdered her entire family. But when I discovered him in the attic and spoiled his plans by having the cops called, he said that he was planning to do to me what he was going to do to my neighbor. And just hearing that made me never want to leave my house again, and I didn't for the longest time. And over the years I stayed in therapy, trying to get over the trauma that Sick Psycho caused me. But I look back at the positives more than the negatives from when I was 16, and I thank God that my dog Ruby was trained to protect me and my mom and dad, But sadly, Ruby would die a few years after, which crushed me. But I would never forget her, or how she saved me and my parents' lives. My name is Haley, and I am a girl who my dad calls your typical high school dropout, who forced me to get a job, so for me to make money, I watch my cousins every weekend while my aunt goes out with her friends to the local bar. But no matter how she spends her time away from her kids, she pays me a generous amount, so who am I to judge what she does in her free time? But my aunt isn't what this story is about, nor was she a part of the horrifying event that took place that night I took my two cousins out trick-or-treating. I will leave their names anonymous, but will tell you that they are twins, and were both 11 years old. And for that Halloween, one dressed up like a witch, and the other one like Anna from the movie Frozen. And our time walking from house to house was quite fun, even though I've grown up and no longer wish to dress up myself. It was still enjoyable to see my two cousins along with other kids in their costumes and with smiles on their faces as they collected candy from the houses we went to. The three of us stayed out pretty late that night, and so we were some of the few people still left walking down our street, with only one house to go. And it was the last house at the end of the road that not many kids went to for some reason, and I never understood why. The house was fixed up with Halloween-themed decor that had us in awe with how well put together it was. There were two giant inflatable pumpkins at the entrance of the gate, along with skeletons, fake cobwebs, and tombstones that filled the yard, and beside them were some spooky lights that gave the place a colorful feel. The yard was set up quite nice, and you can tell the homeowner put in a lot of effort to get attention brought to his home, and being their porch light was still on at that late hour, we went there. We didn't hesitate to rush up and ring the doorbell, and after a few seconds of standing there, some really large man would open the door wearing a sack on his head that had two holes cut out for him to see, and immediately I could tell that something was seriously creepy about him, especially since he never took his eyes off of me, or even spoke a word to my cousins or the other kids that he was giving candy to. He just held out a bag of Reese's and let them take what they wanted, all the while never taking his eyes off of me. It was very creepy, and he gave me a bad feeling about him, and I felt in my stomach that something wasn't right. So I quickly grabbed my two cousins by their hands and told them that we were going home. And as we and others were walking away from the man's house, his head and eyes would follow me until we got out of his view, and it scared me so much that I felt like crying. But I just chalked it up to him being a weirdo to toy with me, even though I was the only one he was toying with. After returning to my aunt's house, I went on about my business and began eating candy with my cousins until it was their bedtime. So I had them go up, brush their teeth, put their pajamas on, and then go to bed as I went back downstairs to play on my phone until my aunt came home. But my peaceful time had soon been interrupted by a knock on the door, and as I looked out the living room window, my heart would pound like it never did before. Standing on the front porch was the man with the sack on his head, and he was looking directly at me. I let out a silent scream and almost fell back off the couch, and right as I caught myself and stood up, I can see and hear the doorknob to the front door begin to turn violently as the man on the other side started pounding on it. I didn't hesitate. I dialed 911 as I ran up the steps to my cousins' bedrooms, where I would get them to follow me to a bathroom where I would lock the door while continuing to talk to the operator. But as if we were a part of a horror movie, we could hear the front door give in, and then the heavy footsteps of the man who was searching the entire downstairs. We could even hear him throwing things around, but then everything went quiet, except for the heavy footsteps that we heard slowly walking up the steps and eventually towards the bathroom, since it was the only door that was shut. The knob started turning, and I felt like screaming out while crying along with my cousins. But I kept in my screams as I put my body weight against the door, knowing that it wouldn't do anything to keep that man out if he were to kick it in. But thank God I didn't have to hold the door long, since we would hear police shouting at the man to drop the knife right before a scuffle took place right outside the door. Afterwards, a cop shouted for us to come out and that they have the man restrained and that we were safe. And as the three of us cautiously walked out of the bathroom, We could see 4 officers, one having a bloody nose, standing in the hallway as the man laid on the floor in cuffs, and for the first time, we could see his face. He had scars down his right cheek and what looked like a lisp, and his eyes were as dark as his soul. And he never said a word. He just continued to look at me as the cops escorted him downstairs and into the back of one of their cars, where they took him off to jail. The sad thing about that night wasn't that he tried to murder me. It was that he did murder the family that lived at the house he was giving candy out at. A mother, a father, and their teenage daughter, who was close to my age at the time. Nobody on our road really knew the family because they never communicated with anyone and mainly kept to themselves, so no one really questioned that creep when trick-or-treating there. They probably thought that he was the man that lived in the house. I am a girl, and when I was a teenager, I used to go to my friend's house to help her babysit her brothers and sisters, which there were 3 boys and 2 girls. But the night where our lives were in danger, we had my friend's neighbor's son spending the night, which made it 6 kids we had to watch. The night started off normal, and my best friend and I were making the kids dinner as the boys played video games in their room with their friend, while the 2 girls sat on the couch watching television. After we got done, we called the children to the table and served them their plates as we too sat down and began to eat lasagna we baked. But we weren't even 5 minutes into eating when someone started to tap on the front door. So my friend reluctantly got up and answered it. It turned out to be a 20-some-year-old guy asking for some girl that we didn't even know, and claimed that my friend's address was the one she gave him. And if that wasn't weird enough, he kept looking past her and into the house at the rest of us before he said sorry and walked off. We were suspicious of his actions, but brushed it off as some guy who had the wrong address, and we left it at that. After we finished dinner, we all went our separate ways again. The boys and their friend went back to playing video games, and me and my best friend and her 2 sisters sat down and began to watch the movie Trolls, before we would again hear a knock at the door. Curious to see if it was the same guy, I walked over and peeked through the blinds, and what I saw scared the hell out of me. The same guy was back and was knocking on the door again, but this time I could spot 2 other men ducking behind the bushes right under the window. So I ran over and stopped her from opening the door, which my friend had her hand on the lock and was about to open it. I whispered to her, informing her of the ambush awaiting her. Of course she was freaked out, shocked, and began crying while repeatedly asking me what to do. So I calmed her down and told her to go call the cops while I tried to distract the 3 men, even though I was scared myself. But before I can get their attention at the window, we would hear a loud crash coming from the bedroom closest to the living room, not even 10 feet from where we were. The 4 of us rushed up to the boys' room, yelling for them to help us push their dresser in front of their door after we locked it. And once we were done blocking the only entrance, the neighbor kid did something I thought was insane at first. And that's when he jumped out the 2-story window and then climbing down the ladders to the ground, where he would then run over to his house. So my friend and I got all the kids to follow behind them before we did, and we all escaped from that house and made it over to the neighbors just in time to see the cops arrive. My friend and I ran over to them and told them about the 3 men who we knew broke into her home, but unfortunately, after they came back out, they would tell us that a few things were smashed, one being the window to the bedroom closest to the living room, and the second was the door belonging to the boys' room. But the scariest thing about the police searching the home was the 3 men was never found. That was my scary story, and I hope that anyone that heard it is now more alert of strangers that knock on their door. So make sure you always check who it is you're opening your door to, and always look out the window because there could be someone else waiting to ambush you.